When building a product, it's pretty easy to know where you are today, what you need to do, where you want to go. The hard part is actually getting there. And the bigger your company becomes, the harder that problem is to solve due to organizational friction, leadership problems, getting people to take ownership, getting everybody to agree, all the problems. Today on the Product Driven Podcast, we're talking to Randy Silver, who's a consultant who helps companies solve this exact problem. Listen in today and learn more if you're struggling with how to run a product team at scale. To survive and thrive, you must adopt a product-driven mindset. And we're back for another episode of Product Driven. This is your host, Matt Watson. Very excited to be joined today by Mr. Randy Silver, who is a product and leadership consultant. And we've got a great topic today. Most companies, most people know where they want to go. They have an idea of how to get there, but they usually get lost along the way. So everybody has a product strategy. Nobody knows how to execute it. So Randy, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt. It's great to be here. I'm not used to being called Mister. That just feels weird.
Well, I didn't want to call you Mrs., but so. Thanks a lot for joining me today. And I guess to get us started, tell us a little bit about what you do as a consultant.
Sure. So I tend to work with organizations. I'm not really a 0 to 1 initial startup guy. I tend to work with companies when they get to the point where they're having some issues around communication, coordination, prioritization at scale, collaboration, the type of things that happens when your company starts scaling up, or when you're a mature company and you realize things just aren't quite going the way we want to. So I'll work with individuals, usually in leadership, on coaching them, or I'll work with organizations on transformation initiatives to try and help them, create an environment where their product development teams actually have a chance of succeeding.
So why is it every team, every company ends up in this, let's call it in-shitification phase, where they have a small team, they're very highly innovative, they're doing a lot of cool stuff, and eventually they just lose their way. And it happens 9 times out of 10. Why do you think that happens?
So in-shitification is a good term, and I like it. I think that it's a specific thing there where you get to a certain scale and you're trying to exploit the product that you have. And instead of continuing to innovate and drive new market share, and maybe there isn't much market share left to grab, instead you're just trying to extract every last bit of money, of potential profit that you can get out of it. And you're not focusing on creating a great user experience. You're not focused on being great for your user. You're focused purely on bottom line profits at that point. I think that's slightly different than teams getting lost along the way, because sometimes they get lost because the company is a little bit confused about what it wants to do. It's easy when you're small. It's easy when you're starting out and going 0 to 1 to say there is a specific signal that we're trying to chase. But when you get bigger, above N number of teams, people have opinions and they don't always talk to each other so much. And their interpretation of what the boss says, or their opinion of what's best for them and their team and how to get someplace, may be different from other people's understanding. And you get a bit of a confusion, you get a bit of a mishmash, you get a lack of focus at the organizational level. And people, no one's got bad intentions. Everyone's trying to do their best, but it's ultimately a failure of good leadership and good communication.
Well, let me ask you this. I imagine a lot of this falls on 2 ends of the spectrum. I'd like to get your opinion on this, where on one side, the companies have so much tight command and control at the top that they're the bottleneck for everything, right? And on the other side, maybe there's nobody at the top driving strategy, and hopefully the team has taken ownership of things, but maybe they've taken ownership in all the wrong ways and all the wrong direction as well. And then I imagine there's a third one where there's neither one of these things happen.
Yeah.
And there's just no strategy at all. What does that make sense? There's a spectrum of kind of
it makes
top down
sense.
And then Lord of the Flies.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I mean, it's no surprise that there's a lot of bad leadership out there. We don't select people for roles because they're great leaders. We select people because they're good at the role they were at, and we push them up to the next level. And we don't always give them the training or the support that they need to solve
We
the
don't give them
different
any
kinds of
training.
problems. Yeah, it happens way too often. So it's not. I don't want to blame people for being bad leaders when they've been placed into situations without the help. Um, there's a problem that people don't understand what leadership necessarily is. And I have a definition of good leadership that is it's the ability to delegate decision making down to the appropriate level. So you've got the bit where you talked about it's command and control. You're not delegating any decision making. You're a bad communicator. Your leadership team is bad at communication at that point and is not establishing a trust environment. There are there are places where that's appropriate, where you have to keep things secret from people. This happens a lot with confidential activities with mergers and acquisitions and things like that, but these are usually temporary things. It's not good culturally to do that. The other side is we've all heard the story about what happened at Airbnb a year or so ago, where Brian Chesky totally changed the way product management was done there. And the way he talked about it at that conference in front of designers, basically he said, we're getting rid of product managers. That's not actually what he was saying. That's how it was heard and interpreted. What he was saying is that everyone and their brother has a roadmap and they're not aligning up together. So we pulled product closer to the center to make sure that they were working together and creating a good management structure and good communication and alignment. That's what's needed. You can't just, people say that they want autonomous teams. Autonomous teams doesn't mean you do whatever you want, period. It means you're doing whatever you want within a tightly controlled box of well-defined goals and outcomes, and you're communicating aggressively with the people around you that are potentially affected by this. That's an effective autonomous team-based organization. So there's still a lot of structure. There's a lot of communication. There's a lot of prioritization to make this stuff work. And people abdicate on that all the time. They miss one side or the other. So, yeah.
Well, I think to your point earlier, everybody wants to do the right thing. Everybody wants to service the customer, right? But in some companies, you're just handcuffed. You're like, I don't know, I can't. I have somebody above me is making all these decisions. But it feels like every company eventually gets to the problems we're describing, where the teams struggle to innovate, or there's issues with coordinating across other business units or other teams, or the leadership that was there that was super innovative and had a lot of thought leadership and all that stuff in the past is gone. But how do you prevent this problem? When somebody calls you and says, we have all these problems, and they bring you in, like, what do you do?
So in this particular case, I've got a 2x2 that I use, and of course I do it because product guy and consultant. So of course I have to have a 2x2, right? It's the basic tool that we bring to these types of things. Start by looking at the three basic elements, though, and these are the things that go into the 2x2. There's the question of based on what Richard Rumelt put in, and he's the guy who wrote Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. People have different feelings about the book, but I love this quote. He says, what I call the kernel of strategy has three elements in it: a diagnosis, a guiding policy, and a coherent action. And if you're leaving one of those out, it's not a strategy. But the words diagnosis, guiding policy, and coherent action, they mean different things to different people. So let's just take a step back on those. So a diagnosis is essentially asking the question, where are we? The guiding policy is saying, where are we going? And the coherent action is, how are we going to get there? And if you want to put that into more of product terms, that diagnosis, the where are we, is a fact. It is a known thing, or it can be a known thing. The guiding policy, the where are we going, that's an ambition. It's an objective. It's a target of where we're trying to get. Lots of people think that's the strategy of where we're trying to go. It's not. You can't make prioritization decisions based on that alone. You have to have that last part, the coherent action. How do we get there? That's your hypothesis.
The policy is usually always the same. We're going to be the best at everything.
No, a lot of times it's we're going to get to 5 million users. We're going to get to 10 million ARR. We're going to get to it's usually a
Yeah.
number, but there can be many different ways that an organization obtains that number, and every team is going to interpret that number differently, or be the best differently. So you can't make good decisions. You can't have good discussions and make decisions together unless you also have that hypothesis of, and this is how we think we're going to do it. So,
But most people find it really easy to make this goal, right? Like usually the goals are not that hard to figure out.
well, usually the management team goes on a retreat, it goes on an offsite, and it comes back with something. And then one of two things happens, and this is where the 2x2 comes in. They either tell people about it or they don't. So it's either communicated or it's not. And then they either have the hypothesis or they don't. So you either have an intentional way of how you're going to get there, or you're being reactive or unintentional about it. People come to you and say, how about this? And someone says, sure, why, that sounds good. And then somebody else walks up and says, I've got this idea. And you start throwing everything at the wall, and you don't have any intention of how you're going to get there. So I usually use a vertical axis for, is your strategy intentional? Do you have the diagnosis, the guiding policy, and the coherent action? Or are you missing a piece of it? That gets you to the unintentional or reactive side of that axis. And then there's have you effectively communicated this? Because lots of times we fail on that. The CEO, the manager says, why aren't you doing it the way that we agreed at the offsite? Well, we never heard. We weren't at the offsite. How do we know what you guys talked about?
Well, and even if you tell somebody, it's like 3 weeks go by and they already forget anyways.
And do you stay consistent with it? Was that the thing that you said 3 weeks ago, and is that still true?
Yeah. Now you've got a new idea. What about the thing from 3 weeks ago? That's the reality.
And now you're being unintentional about your strategy rather than intentional. You're not saying we have a plan. We're going to stick with this plan until facts change. If facts change, if we learn new things and we want to go in a new direction, that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with pivoting and shifting, so long as you tell everybody about it, you let them stop working on the things that are no longer important, and you're steering the boat in the right direction together.
So I really like how you break this down. It's like, where are we trying to go, and how we get there. And so let's talk more about how we get there, because that's the hard part, right? Like if you took this analogy to something else where you're like, okay, I don't eat very well and I want to lose a lot of weight. That's my diagnosis. My goal is to lose a lot of weight and eat healthy. Like it's somewhat easy to come up with that, right? But the hard part is actually execution.
Yeah, well, this is why we hire good delivery managers sometimes, and why it takes lots of different people in a company with different focuses to do that. But it comes down to,
So I need a personal trainer.
in this case, that might be it. They can be your delivery manager, your accountability buddy in this particular one,
Yeah.
or a nutritionist or a dietitian, potentially to help you, or a personal chef. I mean, I need someone to. My partner to make sure that I'm not buying snacks when I go out shopping. There's lots of different ways we can do this. I think the bigger issue for most people is they're placed in the situation of they're a product or dev lead, and they're trying their best to steer their team in the right direction, and they're being told 20 different things from their partners, from their stakeholders, and so it's impossible for them to prioritize. And the question is, what do they do in this situation? How do you create order out of this chaos? I think there's 3 different ways of doing it. You can discover the answer, because it might be out there. You can divine the answer, because if it's not written down, you can find ways of getting it out of the ether, and we can talk more about that. Or you can provoke or prod people to have the right discussions so that you can finally get an answer. These things can be tricky. They're hard to do, but they are good tactics. And this is the kind of thing I usually work with people on, or I do on their behalf with leadership, to try and make sure that we're filling any of those missing elements in.
Well, I feel like most companies probably know what their top priorities are, and they probably stay very focused on them. It's all the secondary and tertiary things that probably just keep falling by the wayside and don't get that attention. And an example of this is even at full scale, as a leadership team, there's certain things we're very focused on that are always top of mind. But then there's these other things. We're like, yeah, we'd like to get this thing done. We'd like to make enhancements to this internal thing. We'd like to do this. I don't really want to spend any time on it. I really don't care that much. It's not a top priority for me. But we still want to do the thing. But the team probably feels like there's some leadership vacuum there because it doesn't get any of our attention. Mm-hmm. But in a big company, I would imagine a lot of things end up in that gray area, right? Like the company always has that super high priority one or two things, but everything else is end up in that gray area. Is that ultimately the big problem?
It happens a lot, and part of the problem is the teams that are working on this stuff, at the coalface, the teams working locally on the problem, they know where all the underlying problems lie. They know all the things that have been missed in the past that they want to go back and fix, or all the little problems that are cropping up, which may or may not be that important in the grand scale of things. Sometimes they're incredibly important. If we keep building this thing at this rate, it's going to break. We have to go back and refactor some of the code base. We have to make it make it work at a scale that it wasn't originally designed for. It's getting creaky around the edges. We're not able to release or develop as quickly as we should be because of these things that are holding us back from from legacy infrastructure. Or we've got things that are coming up that are coming out on the risk register from security reviews, or new versions of software we have to accommodate, and things like that. Basic tasks. We can call it gardening tasks to make sure that your plot is healthy and that you can keep everything going. And at a management level, you're only looking at the top end. You're looking at the outcomes, but you're not looking at all the little basic infrastructure things on a regular basis. The best way to do that, really the healthy way to do that in most cases, is to use what my friend Lucy McLean calls a portfolio strategy, where you're saying we devote, similar to how you potentially look at your retirement funding, certain amount of it is going to go into your high risk, high growth things. A certain amount of it is going to go into keep the box ticking along, keep everything going. And a certain amount is going to stay, no matter what, don't break this. If something's going wrong here, it's an immediate, it's, a spike that needs to be dealt with immediately. But being really conscious and saying, we're going to devote, at best, 50 to 60% of our capacity to these top end things, to these management priorities, because there is a whole bunch of infrastructure work that we just have to do. And most of the time, teams are asked to capitalize nearly 80 to 100% of their time, or potentially more than 100% of their time on the company strategy. So I think it's sometimes in a more mature organization that's got legacy issues and growing pains, you've got to make sure you're giving the teams the time to clean up after themselves, and that you've got the right people in place to help manage that process so that they're dealing with it in a mature way.
You mentioned earlier that having a really good delivery manager is key. And that's the thing I keep thinking about in my head as you keep talking about all this stuff is, I feel like in early stage startups, you have a founder, a CTO, a lead developer, somebody, a good product person that is like a really, really good delivery manager, and because they really get the product, they have the vision for it, they understand how to even essentially write the code and get it to market. And then when companies get bigger and bigger, they either don't have these sort of delivery managers, right? Or the quality of them just kind of goes way down, or they just don't have the authority that, they don't have the same intuition, the same product vision, the same level of authority. And it is part of the challenge that companies need to start by just naming that person. Like, you are ultimately in charge of this thing from start to finish. It is all on your shoulders. Whatever help you need to go get it, but you're responsible. Like, is part of it just they just don't name this person?
I think a big part of it is that as companies grow, they don't recognize the lack of the inherent complexity that comes with it. So when you start, you are trying to deal with everything, and everything is essentially a first or second order problem. You fix something over here and may have an effect over there, but you can pretty much keep track of it in your head. You've got N number of people around a table in a small office. You can all talk to each other. as you start to grow and you get lots of different teams, you don't know the effects that you're having, and you're starting to deal with things that are compliance and regulatory and all these
Yeah.
challenges that get in the way of let's just do this. The word just is the most dangerous word in technology, by the way, because it covers so many sins. You lift the hood on the word just, and it's all the stuff that nobody wants to deal with. So recognizing how hard things are, how much more complex, how much more time it takes to do these things, and giving people the ability to do it, and then having the right processes in place. We try and do a lot. Um, there are still companies that don't release software very often, that don't have CI/CD, that don't have good testing in place, and they're trying to do QA manually, and they miss a lot. And then you've got companies that are more mature and have these good processes in place, and they learn very quickly to do test-driven development, to have good CI/CD processes, so that they know what's breaking and what's working in near real time. Now we're introducing AI tooling into it, and specifically the black box of LLMs. And we don't know necessarily what's going to happen. We can't always do effective QA on these things. So it makes it more complicated yet again. So it's just a real challenge in understanding that as you get more complex, as you get bigger, it's, yes, you do need effective people, you do need effective processes, but you also need the time to let people do this and test it properly. And whether that's going to everyone all at once, whether it's feature flagging, whether it's stage gating, there are ways of doing this, but it's harder than just releasing like you did when you were a startup.
Well, so if somebody's listening to this right now and they're like, "Man, I have these problems. Our company is such a mess. The different teams and coordination and product and all that." Do you have like a single big suggestion for them of where to start?
I think the biggest thing that people can do is not to try to boil the ocean. Sit down and have a good discussion. I have another canvas that I use, which is just my mental model of things. And when I coach people, I listen to them, and I tend to slot things into one of these four areas. So first off, do you know what your priorities are? Do you know what the team needs to be working on and what's not as important right now? Then do you have the right number of them with the right capabilities and the culture to do the work that they need to do? Then I start to look at, do your processes allow you to deliver value at pace, or are they just there to add bureaucracy? Was this a good idea a year ago, but it's no longer really relevant and it's not helping anymore? And for a long time, I thought it was just those three things. And then I had the fourth one at the bottom now, which is perception. Because your team, as an engineering team, as a product team, you can be thinking you're doing all these things right. But if sales, if your marketing team, if your CEO doesn't perceive that you're doing the things, that you've got the right people, that you're working on the right stuff, that the processes are working for them, then it doesn't really matter. You need to come to an agreement on this. So what I like to do in these situations is get people to talk together about how they rate these four different things and what is their perception of how everything's going. And let's find where things are mismatched. It's usually a failure of communication that's the underlying driver. Once we've got that, then we can prioritize one or two problems at a time and say, let's pick this thing. This is a key thing that's going to make us better. And it usually comes down to, let's change a process, let's hire or get rid of somebody, or train people, or let's focus on the right thing or things and stop doing some other stuff. If you can get to one of those, that helps a lot, and that improves the perception and creates an agreement.
From your perspective and your experience consulting with a lot of these companies now, how do you think AI is impacting product teams at this level? Is it helping it or making it worse?
Yes, to both. It's really interesting. I've been talking to a lot of people about this lately. I've talked to a woman who's writing a book about designing for, instead of designing for humans, you're as the interface, designing for agents as your interface. I've talked to people, a guy who took his company's design system and hooked it up to an MCP, and he, as a product lead, was able to essentially create production ready code for his company in the right design system just by playing around with prompts and putting things out, which sounds amazing. He's one person product team potentially. But then I would talk to another guy who's thinking about, yes, you can deliver things faster, but the process along the way, the friction that we had, the discussion and the collaboration with people, that adds a lot. There are things that we want to go faster at, but what are we missing out? What are we losing by not having these discussions with each other? The teams that I'm hearing from that are happiest and are doing it best are those that are updating their processes. They're still working as a team. They're prototyping a lot faster, but the underlying philosophy of product development doesn't really change. It's understanding the problem really well, prototyping and trying different things, and then building and scaling in a reliable way. How we do it is going to continually change, but why we do it and the kinds of actions we take along the way at a macro level, I think they're pretty solid.
I think AI helps a lot with prototyping and that part of it, I feel like. But for most of these large companies, I honestly don't feel like AI is going to help them at all. And the reason I say that is, like, my first company that I sold 14 years ago has invested probably $100 million since then on R&D. And the product literally does less stuff than it did 14 years ago. And the user interface hasn't changed. Their problem is not money. They have all the money in the world. Their problem is organizational friction.
Yeah. Well, so AI is not
going to fix that. If they can code twice as fast, isn't going to matter.
No, you still need good leadership. You need good decision making. And I think one of the fundamental problems there is people hear AI and they think it's indistinguishable from them in the way they talk from magic pixie dust. They don't know what it actually is. And there is no such thing as AI. There are lots of different technologies that have that banner at the top. So are you doing RPA? Are you doing ML? Are you using LLMs? What is the technology you're using? What are you trying to fix? I'm writing something with a friend right now about how to characterize and have better discussions about this when your leaders come in and say, hey, we've got this idea. Can't you just do it? Because ultimately, most of what we're trying to do with a lot of this stuff in a lot of the cases, and a lot where the low-hanging fruit is to automate things, to make things go faster, to find economies. And we found using the Cynefin model, if you've ever come across that one, is a really good one. It's got 4 domains of clear, complicated, complex, and chaotic. And clear is, very simple to understand. Complicated, like a really tough Lego set, but you've got the instructions and you know how to do it. It's just a bit of a pain to do. Complex is a little wackier. You put something in and something might change dynamically somewhere else. It's not always the easiest to understand. And chaotic is a complete and utter mess. And there are different strategies of what you would use and which things you should, when you should apply these tools for each of those domains. And that's something we'll have published in the next week or two.
So that's built on a current existing model? You said the Kevin model or something?
It's a Welsh word. If you've seen it online, it's spelled Cynefin or Cynefin, but in Welsh it's pronounced Cynefin, like the name Kevin with an N after the K.
Okay. All right. Well, that sounds pretty cool. Well, I really appreciate having you on the show today. I'm curious if you have any other final tips for everybody listening today.
The hardest thing in all of this, Jana Bastow once did a talk at Mind the Product where she started off saying, people are hard. And they are. They're the hardest thing in technology. And the only thing harder than people is lots of people. And we are dealing with lots of people. Most of our companies are at least partially, if not fully remote these days. And even if you are in office, there are other offices that you're dealing with a lot of the time, or collaborators externally. Communication, it needs to be really intentional. And figuring out what the right way of doing it when your schedule is full of meetings is something that takes some doing, and is worth taking some time out to work with your team on what are the right processes, how can we revisit what we've got to make sure that we have a common understanding of what we're trying to do what the
Driving
definition of
clarity.
success for it is and when we need that by. And once you have that, it's so much easier. And so much of the time that so many of the people I'm talking to, you lose the forest for the trees on this one, especially if you've been in a company for a while. You need to step back once in a while and just make sure you've got those basics in place.
You're sounding like the product-driven book. Vision, focus, clarity. These are all critical things. It's a daily, weekly task of driving with the team. Where are we going? How do we get there? What to do? What not to do? When to do it? All the things.
It's amazing how much of it comes back to basic stuff, but
Yeah.
They're hard. They are hard to do well.
It's the fundamentals. Well, Randy, thank you so much for being on the show. If somebody needs a consultant like you, where would they find you? Or tell us more about how people can follow you online.
Sure. So I've got a company called outofowls.com, OUTOFOWLS. So you can find me there. It's me and friends as a collective. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on LinkedIn. I've got a podcast myself with Mind the Product. There's not too many Randy Silvers out there, but there is another one who does sports broadcasting out of Nebraska. I'm not that one.
All right, and I'm not the other YouTuber called Matt Watson. All right, thank you, guys. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt.
Before we wrap up today's episode, we have a special resource for you if you're looking to elevate your development team to have more of a product-driven mindset. I have a fantastic free ebook about turning your code-first team into a product-first team. Please go to fullscaleteam.com/product-first-teams to download this free ebook. There's also a link in the show notes. Thanks for listening to Product Driven, and we'll see you in the next episode.